"The final clause," he said, his voice dropping to that low, resonant baritone that still made her heart skip. "I've added a provision for a joint signature on all ventures, not as a matter of law, but as a matter of necessity." Amelia walked over, leaning over his shoulder. The heat of him was a constant, grounding presence. She watched as he signed his name in that sharp, decisive hand. Then he handed the quill to her. Her hand covered his as she took the pen. As she signed her name beneath his, the ink merging on the page, she felt him turn slightly, his breath warm against her cheek. "It is a balanced account, then," she teased gently, though her eyes were bright with unshed tears. Silas set the quill aside and stood, his hands finding her waist. He pulled her flush against him, the constraints of propriety falling away in the sanctuary of their shared labor. He looked at her, not as an asset, not as a social veneer, but as the woman who had seen the man behind the mathematics and found him worthy. "No," he whispered, his lips grazing hers. "The interest, my love, is compounding. I find I am hopelessly, eternally in your debt." He kissed her then, a slow, deep closing of the distance that tasted of truth and hard-won peace. There was no math for the way she felt in his arms, no formula for the weight of his heart against hers. In the quiet of the library, amidst the scent of ink and the shadows of 1,000 stories, they remained, two souls who had turned the wreckage of a lie into the foundation of a truth. For in the end, Silas Thorne had learned what no ledger could teach, that the only investment truly worth the risk is the one that costs you everything and gives you back your soul. Violet wiped a smudge of soot from her forehead with the back of a gloved hand, gloves she would have to burn later. "The watch is looking for a man in a rough coat, Betsy. They are looking for a disgruntled clerk or a radical weaver. They are not looking for a woman who spent 4 hours this afternoon discussing the merits of silk paws." She set the pamphlet aside to dry. Her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her stays. It wasn't just the fear of Newgate that thrilled her, it was the power of it. With a few pounds of lead and a gallon of ink, she was dismantling the world that sought to stifle her. 2 miles away, in a room that smelled of expensive brandy and the cold, clinical scent of beeswax, Lord William Stirling stared at a map of London. To his peers, William was the quintessential bachelor, composed, formidable, and possessed of a stare that could wither a debutante at 50 paces. To the Home Office, he was their most effective hound. "The quill is getting bolder," Sir Julian remarked, tossing a crumpled pamphlet on William's desk. "This one was found pinned to the door of the Prime Minister's carriage. It's well written, too well written. It's the work of an educated mind, William. Find him, silence him before the riots begin." William picked up the paper, his thumb brushing over the bold typeface. He felt a strange, begrudging respect for the rhythm of the prose. It was sharp, logical, and utterly infuriating. "It is the work of a romantic," William said, his voice a low, gravelly baritone. "Someone who believes words can change the bedrock of an empire. I shall find him, Julian. Men like this always leave a trail of ink." The salon of Lady Ponsonby was a suffocating sea of pastel silks and practised apathy. Violet stood near a fluted column, her fan fluttering with a deceptive languor. Her fingers felt stripped bare without the stains of the cellar. She felt like an actress who had forgotten her lines, forced to play the role of the vapid Lady Violet once more. "I hear," a voice rumbled behind her, "that latest screed from the Quill suggests that even women should have a say in the Corn Laws. A drill thought, is it not?" Violet stiffened, then turned, smoothing her expression into one of polite, vacant interest. Lord William Stirling stood before her. He was broader than he had appeared in the journals, his evening coat straining slightly against shoulders that looked better suited to a battlefield than a ballroom. His eyes, however, were the real danger, a piercing, intelligent grey that seemed to strip away her layers of silk and propriety. "Lord Stirling," Violet said, dipping a precise curtsy,
I should think droll is a mild word for such a scandal, though one must wonder if the writer merely suggests that those who eat the bread should have a say in its price. William's eyebrows rose. He stepped closer, invading her personal space just enough to be provocative. A dangerous bit of logic, Lady Violet. If we allow everyone with an appetite to dictate policy, we shall have anarchy by breakfast. And if we allow only those with a title to dictate it, we have a famine by dinner, she countered, her wit outstripping her caution. A flash of something, was it amusement or a challenge, lit William's eyes. He leaned down, his voice copping to a conspiratory murmur. You speak with a great deal of passion for a woman whose greatest concern this week was surely the shade of her ribbon.
Violet felt the heat rise in her cheeks, a fierce, indignant spark. Perhaps, my lord, women speak of ribbons because men such as yourself have made it clear that any other topic would be quite above our fragile understandings. It is a mercy, really. Thinking is so terribly taxing on the complexion. William let out a short, sharp bark of a laugh. It was an honest sound, jarringly out of place in the artificial stillness of the salon. You are remarkably dismissive, Lady Violet. It is almost as if you find this entire assembly beneath you. I find the conversation repetitive, my lord, much like the government's response to the poor. William's gaze sharpened. He looked at her then, not as a prize to be won on the marriage mart, but as a puzzle to be solved. He noticed the way she gripped her fan too tightly, and the way her eyes darted toward the door, as if longing for the night air. Female politics is a charming hobby, William said, his tone deliberately patronizing, a lure cast into deep water. But the world is moved by steel and law, not by the fancies of the drawing-room. Violet's smile was as sharp as a guillotine. Steel can be melted, my lord, and laws are merely words on paper. It is the fire behind them that matters. I do hope you find your Quill. It would be a shame for such masculine authority to be bested by a bit of stationery. She turned on her heel, her silk skirts hissing against the floorboards, leaving William standing in the centre of the room. He watched her go, his pulse tripping in a way that had nothing to do with the hunt and everything to do with the woman. He had come to the salon to find a revolutionary. He hadn't expected to find a fire.
Chapter 2. The Geometry of Shadows. The following Tuesday arrived with a sky the colour of a bruised plum, heavy with the threat of a deluge. It was a day for staying indoors by a crackling hearth, yet Lord William Stirling appeared at the Thorne townhouse with the relentless punctuality of a tax collector. He had come, officially, to discuss the upcoming vote on the poor laws with Violet's father, the Earl of Radcliffe, but as Violet watched from the mezzanine, her fingers tracing the cold marble of the balustrade, she knew the Earl was merely the gateway. William's gaze, sharp and restless, kept flickering towards the staircase. He was hunting, and she was the fox who had invited him into the den. Lady Violet, William greeted her moments later in the morning room, his voice a low vibration that seemed to hum in the very floorboards. He bowed, the movement crisp and efficient. I trust you've recovered from the exhaustion of Lady Ponsonby's conversation? I find I have a sturdy constitution, my lord, Violet replied, smoothing the front of her day dress, a modest sage silk that felt like a suit of armour. Though I confess, the silence of a Tuesday morning is a welcome relief after so much drollery. Then perhaps you would permit me a turn in the conservatory. Your father informs me his orchids are the envy of London, and I find myself in need of a distraction from the dry arithmetic of the house. It was a blatant pretext, but one Violet could not refuse without appearing churlish. As they stepped into the glass-walled sanctuary, the air grew thick and humid, smelling of damp earth, crushed ferns, and the sweet, cloying scent of exotic blooms. It was a sensory trap, a place where the edges of propriety blurred.
You were quite fierce the other night, William said, his boots clicking rhythmically against the stone tiles. He didn't look at the orchids, he looked at her. I spent a considerable amount of time wondering if your radicalism was a performance designed to shock or a conviction born of something deeper.
Violet felt a prickle of heat at her neck. She reached out to touch a waxy petal, her movements deliberate. Does it matter? In either case, a woman's conviction is rarely invited to the table where the steel and law are forged. It matters to me, he said, stepping closer. The scent of rain on his wool coat, a cold metallic freshness, mingled with the hothouse air. Because I am the man tasked with ensuring that fire you spoke of does not burn the city down. The Quill is not just writing essays, Violet. He or she is inciting a fever, and fever, left unchecked, kills the patient. And your remedy is what, my lord? A slow, agonizing bloodletting? Violet turned to face him, her eyes flashing. You speak of slow reform as if the hungry can wait a decade for a loaf of bread. You want to polish the chains until they shine, while the Quill wants to break them. William didn't flinch. Instead, he took another step, placing him well within the circle of her scent, a mix of rosewater and the faint, lingering acridity of wood smoke she could never quite wash away. I want the building to stand while we replace the foundation, William counted, his voice dropping to a gravelly intimacy. You radicals want to pull out the cornerstone and act surprised when the roof collapses on the very people you claim to protect. Change must be negotiated, Lady Violet. It must be woven into the fabric of the law, or it is nothing but a bloody riot.
For a moment, the intellectual chasm between them vanished, replaced by a raw, electric tension. His hand moved, a reflective, half-finished gesture, as if he wanted to reach out and brush the stray curl from her temple. Violet felt the pull of him, a gravitational force that terrified her. He wasn't the monster she had imagined. He was a man who truly believed in his version of the world, and that made him infinitely more dangerous. You have a list, don't you? She whispered, the sudden shift in topic a desperate parry. A list of suspects. William's expression shuttered, the hunter returning to the surface. I have leads. The press used by the Quill has a unique flaw, a ghosting of the letter S in certain fonts. It is a signature. I am currently tracing every printing house and private press in the city. Violet's heart turned to lead. Her press, the small, salvaged machine in the cellar, had a misaligned carriage that did exactly that. I see, she managed, her voice tight. Your father has invited me to stay for luncheon, William said, his gaze lingering on her lips for a second too long. I believe I shall accept. There is much I wish to investigate. The opportunity presented itself an hour later. William had been summoned to the Earl's study for a private word, leaving his heavy leather dispatch case on the side table in the morning room. Violet stood in the doorway, her breath hitching. The house was quiet, the servants busy in the kitchens. This was the betrayal. This was the line. She moved with the silent grace of a ghost. The buckles of the case were stiff, the leather smelling of expensive saddle soap. Inside she found a sheaf of reports from the Home Office. Her eyes scanned the pages frantically. Names of printers, addresses and Spitalfields, and then a handwritten note in William's bold, slashing script. Suspect the ink is sourced from the vendor on Fleet Street. Surveillance begins Friday.
That was where Betsy bought their supplies. A heavy footfall sounded in the hallway. Violet shoved the papers back into the case, her hands trembling so violently she nearly fumbled the buckle. She had just stepped back toward the window when William entered. He paused, his eyes darting from her to the dispatch case, then back to her face. Violet felt the guilt like a physical weight, a crushing pressure in her chest. She had never been a liar, not in her heart, and the look of budding trust in his eyes felt like a knife. Is something wrong, Lady Violet? He asked, his voice softened by a sudden, misplaced concern. You look quite pale. The heat of the conservatory, she lied, the words tasting like ash. It has left me with a headache. William crossed the room, his hand coming up to rest, briefly, agonizingly, on her arm. The touch was meant to be steadying, but it sent a jolt of pure electricity through her. Then I shall take my leave and trouble you no longer, he said. He picked up his case, his fingers brushing the leather she had just touched. But I shall return, Violet. We have not finished our debate. As he walked away, Violet slumped against the window frame. She had the information she needed to save her operation, but at a cost she hadn't anticipated.
She was no longer just a rebel, she was a thief of secrets from a man who looked at her as if she were the only truth in a world of lies. Outside, the rain finally broke, lashing against the glass with a violence that matched the storm rising in her soul.
Chapter 3. The Ghost of the Machine. The air in London had turned thick with the iron scent of blood and the acrid tang of charred timber. Violet stood by her bedroom window, her forehead pressed against the cool pane, watching the orange glow flickering on the horizon. The East End was burning. Her latest pamphlet, a scathing critique of the new Enclosure Acts, had been the spark. It had been intended of a call for peaceful assembly, a plea for the dignity of the displaced. But words are unruly things. Once unleashed, they belong to the desperate. The Quill's prose had been chanted as a battle cry as the starving weavers of Spitalfields marched on the warehouses. A heavy, rhythmic pounding at the front door vibrated through the floorboards. Violet's breath hitched. She didn't need to be told who it was. She hurried to the landing, her heart a frantic bird against the bars of her ribs. Below, in the foyer, the Earl's butler was opening the door to a vision of grim authority. Lord William Sterling looked as if he had ridden through the gates of hell itself. His greatcoat was splattered with mud, his jaw set in a line of granite, and behind him stood two men in the distinctive red waistcoats of the Bow Street runners. Lord Sterling, her father's voice drifted up, sounding aged and confused. At this hour, surely the unrest hasn't reached Mayfair. Not yet, my lord. William's voice was a low, dangerous rumble. But the instigator is closer than you think. We have tracked the source of the seditious ink. A maid from this house was seen at a vendor on Fleet Street, purchasing the exact chemical blend used by the Quill. Violet felt the world tilt. Betsy. She had been too careless. In her hunger for the cause, she had sent the girl into the lion's mouth. She watched from the shadows of the gallery as William gestured to his men. Search the servants' quarters. Bring the girl, Elizabeth Miller, to me.
William, surely there is some mistake, the Earl protested, but he was brushed aside with a cold, professional efficiency that made Violet's blood run cold. She didn't wait to hear more. She ducked back into her room, her mind racing. If they found Betsy, the girl would be broken in an afternoon. She would hang for a treason she only helped facilitate out of love for her mistress, and if they found the press in the cellar, a space Betsy used for laundry, but Violet used for revolution, it would be the end of everything. Violet slipped down the back servants' stairs, her silk skirts bunched in her hands. The cellar was silent, the air still smelling of the ink that was now a death warrant. She looked at the press, the iron lever, the misaligned carriage, the S that ghosted like a haunting memory. It was her soul made manifest. It was the only part of her that was truly free. And I must kill it. With a sob she choked back into her throat. Violet grabbed a heavy iron pry bar. She didn't just need to hide it, she needed to surrender it. She needed to provide a sacrifice that would lead the hounds away from the girl and toward a phantom. She began to dismantle the machine, the screech of metal on metal sounding like a scream in the quiet cellar. Each bolt she loosened felt like a bone breaking in her own body. She took a final wet sheet, a half-printed manifesto, and smeared it with her own thumbprint, then dropped Betsy's distinctive blue hair ribbon, which she had snatched from the laundry, near the base. No, that would implicate Betsy further. She paused, her intellect warring with her panic. If she turned in the press anonymously, making it look as though the Quill had fled in a hurry, leaving the evidence behind, she could claim Betsy had merely been an unwitting courier. She grabbed a scrap of paper and wrote in the disguised, blocky hand she used for the pamphlets. The bird has flown, but the cage remains. The girl knows nothing but the weight of the parcels. She took the heavy inkstone and smashed it against the floor, the black liquid splattering her hem like a permanent stain of guilt. Then she fled up the stairs, breathless, and slipped into the library just as she heard the heavy tread of boots approaching the cellar door.
Minutes later, a cry went up from below. Violet stood in the library, trembling, a book held upside down in her hands. The door swung open, and William entered. He was alone. His face was a mask of conflicting emotions. Fury, yes, but also a haunting, hollow disappointment. "We found it," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "The press. In your cellar, Lady Violet." "My cellar?" she asked, her voice high and brittle. I don't understand. My father uses it for storage." William walked toward her, his presence overwhelming the small room. He reached out and took her hand. Violet tried to pull away, but his grip was firm. He turned her hand over, exposing the palm. There, in the creases of her skin, was a faint, stubborn smudge of black ink. "I found the note," William said, his eyes searching hers with an intensity that felt like a physical blow. "The Quill claims the girl is innocent, but the Quill was messy tonight. They left a trail of ink and a broken heart." "William, do not," he snapped, his voice cracking. "I have ordered the runners to take the press. I told them the girl was a dupe and that the printer escaped through the coal chute. I have lied for you, Violet. I have compromised my office, my honor, and the law I swore to uphold." "You did it to save her," she whispered.
"I did it to save you," he barked, stepping so close she could feel the heat radiating from his chest. "And God help me, I don't know if I've saved a saint or a devil." He let go of her hand as if it burned him. The silence between them was no longer the silence of the drawing room. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a battlefield after the firing has stopped. Violet looked at the empty space where her press had been in her mind, feeling a hollow ache in her chest that no amount of silk or status could ever fill. She had saved Betsy, but she had murdered her own voice to do it. "Stay in this house, Violet," William warned, turning toward the door. "If you so much as touch a pen tonight, I will not be able to stop what comes for you." He left, the heavy thud of the front door echoing like a gavel. Violet sank to the floor, the black ink on her hands a mark she knew would never truly wash away. Chapter 4. The Crucible of Partnership. The morning arrived not with the triumphant gold of a new era, but with a thin, watery grey light that bled through the heavy velvet curtains of the library. Violet had not slept. She sat in the high-backed leather chair, her fingers tracing the indentation on her middle finger where the pen usually rested, a phantom limb of her former life. The house was unnaturally still, the servants moving on tiptoe as if there had been a death in the family. In a way, there had been. The Quill was dead. The door opened without a knock. William stood there, his appearance transformed. Gone was the muddied officer of the night before. He was dressed in a charcoal morning coat of impeccable cut, his cravat tied with a precision that bordered on the aggressive. But his face, his countenance was a landscape of exhaustion and a strange, flickering awe.
He closed the door and locked it. The click of the bolt sounded like the cocking of a pistol. "I spent the night at the Home Office," he said, his voice sandpaper dry. He didn't approach her, but stood by the hearth, staring at the cold ashes. "I told them the press we found was a secondary site. I told them the Quill was a man of the working class who had been tipped off and fled to France. I burned the note you left, and I've officially closed the file." Violet stood, her legs trembling. "Why?" "Because," he turned to her, and the intensity of his gaze made her catch her breath. "I saw the way you looked at that machine, like a mother looking at a child she had to smother to save the village. I have spent my life chasing men who want power for the sake of it, or men who want to tear things down because they are bored. I have never met a woman who would dismantle her own soul to protect a maid." He finally moved toward her, his boots silent on the Persian rug. He stopped just inches away, the scent of cedar and old books surrounding them. "You are a liar, Violet Thorne. You are a thief, a seditionist, and a radical who would see my world turned upside down." He reached out,
his hand hovering near her cheek, before finally settling with agonizing tenderness against her jaw. "And you are the only person I have ever met who is as truly alive as I am. I cannot be the woman you want, William," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I cannot sit in a drawing room and discuss the weather while the world outside is in tatters. I tried. I failed. The fire is still there, even without the press."
"I know," he said, and a ghost of a smile touched his lips, a smile that held both pain and a profound, newfound respect. "That is why I am not asking you to sit in a drawing room. I am a man of the law, Violet. I know the levers of power, how they groan, how they can be greased, and how they can be forced to turn. But I lack the spark. I am the iron. You are the flame." He took her hand, the one still marked by that stubborn smudge of ink, and brought it to his lips. He didn't kiss her knuckles like a courtier. He kissed the stain itself. "Marry me," he commanded, though it sounded like a prayer. "Not to be a quiet Lady Sterling. Marry me and be my most dangerous adviser. Give me your pamphlets, and I will turn them into speeches. Give me your radical heart, and I will give you the pragmatism to see your dreams actually written into the statutes of this land. We shall fight them from within, Violet. Together, we will be a force the Lords will never see coming." Violet looked at him, seeing not the hunter who had cornered her, but a partner who offered her the one thing she thought she had lost, a voice that wouldn't have to hide in cellars or fear the night. "They will hate us," she whispered, a wild, reckless hope blooming in her chest. "Let them," William replied, his eyes dark with a passion that was no longer just intellectual. He pulled her into his arms, his embrace a sanctuary of strength. "I would rather burn with you than be cold with the rest of the world." As his mouth met hers, the kiss wasn't one of polite courtship. It was a collision of two opposing forces finding their center. It tasted of salt, of desperation, and of the first real truth she had ever known. The Quill was gone, but the story was only just beginning. Long after William left to prepare the formal announcement, Violet stood by the window, watching the London fog lift to reveal a city of endless, complicated possibilities. She looked down at her hand, where the ink smudge had finally begun to fade, replaced by the heavy, golden weight of a promise. She realized then that the most radical act wasn't the printing of a pamphlet in the dark. It was the courage to be seen, to be loved, and to change the world one whispered truth at a time.